thank you so much for joining. In today's video, I would like to shortly introduce M&M propositions, so-called Modigliani and Miller propositions, because those two people, they won the Nobel Prize in economics for this work, and the work is all about capital structure, to understand how much debt should a company take on to reduce their cost of capital. So they did a bit of work, and to understand the M&M propositions better, what many textbooks, professors, lecturers and practitioners do, they start very easy with so-called perfect capital market assumptions, PCMA. So they look at an ideal world where we don't need to pay taxes, where there is no bankruptcy cost, no information asymmetry, it's all perfect. And then what they do, they introduce more and more complexities. So one friction means after living in the ideal world, they add the effect of corporate taxes. Then two frictions, they add the effect of corporate taxes and bankruptcy cost. And then it goes even further to add information asymmetry, transaction cost, different borrowing rates. But what Modigliani and Miller did, they basically started looking at some of the key areas and key formulas and look at, okay, the more debt we take on, what will change? And to support their work, they look at 4 dimensions for each of those areas. So they start with those 4 dimensions here. Then they add taxes, they look at those 4 dimensions here, they look at 2 frictions, they look at those 4 dimensions here, and so on. What are those dimensions? It's actually not 4, it's actually more 3. So they look at cost of equity here, cost of equity, and what effect the proportion of debt has. What happens if we add more debt? What is the effect on cost of equity? Then the second dimension is what happens with our weighted average cost of capital if there's no tax. What happens with our weighted average cost of capital is if there is tax effect, especially when we talk about 1 friction and 2 friction. And then finally, what happens if we look at our company value here. I've just used a simple NPV formula. And what is happening under perfect capital market assumptions? They basically assume that the company value will not change, because once you take on more debt, your cost of equity will increase because your beta will increase. Yeah, this will remain. Risk-free rate is an external number. Market risk, external risk-free rate. This is your market risk premium. Market risk premium. So your beta will increase. Which increases your cost of equity. Yeah, so your RE increases. And then if you change your ratios, your weight of debt and equity, and you know your RE increases, means your WACC will remain the same. There's no change. Yeah, let's do a quick example. Let's assume we have 50% debt. Cost of debt is 5%. Plus we have 50% equity, and let's just assume our cost is 10%. So then our weighted average cost of capital is 7.5%. Yeah, this is our starting point. Now if we add more debt, let's say we go to 75%. Because we have taken on more debt. Then what is happening? 5% plus 25%. And then, I don't do the calculation now, but then because we have taken on more debt, the business has become more risky. I've done another video on this to give you more detail. But then your beta will increase, which will increase your cost of equity. And they basically move similar, which means your new cost of equity will then be 15%, which means your weighted average cost of capital will remain at 7.5%. Yeah, and if you type this in, again, we are not talking about taxes here, so we leave this formula there for now. Then our weighted average cost of capital remains. We also think about cash flow. The company has not generated more, so this will remain the same. So the first argument is capital structure is irrelevant. There's no additional value. Our discount rate does not change. Nothing is happening. Then if we go to the second one, we say debt increases company value. How that? This is because we would not use this formula without tax, because now we assume there is tax. If we would play through the same example and we would add a 40% tax rate here, then what would happen? In the first example, when we have our 50-50 case, we have a weighted average cost of capital of 6.5%. You can do the example by yourself, same numbers. We just add 40% tax rate. Because this number is then reduced because of the tax amount, it will lower our weighted average cost of capital. If we increase our debt amount to 75, same as before, and adding again 40%, then we will actually see 75% times 5 times 1 minus 40% plus 25% times 15%, this will actually lead to 6%. Yeah. So if we look at, okay, now we have added taxes to our scenario, this would remain the same. More debt always increases your cost of equity. Should not change anything. However, because we have added taxes here, our weighted average cost of capital decreases, and because it decreases, our discount rate is lower, which means our company value increases. So under the second one, we would say debt increases company value, which would lead to the action take on as much debt as possible, which in the real world is not possible because there are other dimensions. There are other frictions. Third one is bankruptcy cost. Corporate tax is bankruptcy cost, which would lead to, okay, we do exactly the same. We take on more and more debt because we know it would drive our net present value. However, and I've done another video on bankruptcy cost and financial distress cost, we would need to deduct a present value of financial distress from our cash flow here, because if we add too much debt, there are financial distress costs, loss of suppliers, loss of customers, legal fees we potentially have to pay, auction fees, and so on and so forth, which means you have a positive effect here of corporate taxes, take on more debt. But here we would say more debt has a negative effect, so please take on less debt. Yeah, and when we introduce corporate tax and bankruptcy cost, then our answer is there is an optimal capital structure that balances the benefits, taxes, and cost of debt. So that's why in every company there are teams doing scenarios analysis to think about what is the best capital structure for our business. If we would even go further and add informational symmetry, transaction costs, different borrowing costs, it would become even more complicated. But yeah, theory, capital structure irrelevant, because more debt increases your cost of equity and it will balance each other out if we assume no taxes, no distress cost. Once we add taxes, yes, debt has a positive tax effect, so more debt should be better. However, if we add additional frictions, such as bankruptcy cost, then there is a limit. And that's where the optimal capital structure comes into play. Yeah, I hope you found this useful. So always think about, start from the ideal world, go up to more complexity, and then usually think about, okay, what happens with cost of equity, what happens with WACC, and what is the impact then on your company value. So the analysis usually goes from top to bottom. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this useful. See you in another video. Bye bye.